Welcome back, everyone, to the Panda School of Chess YouTube channel. You're watching the fourth episode of the Main Line Theory Speedrun. Now, I know that this was supposed to be a theory video where I discussed the English opening, what we faced in the second video, but that requires a lot of effort and preparing for, and I'm not feeling very well yet. But I do want to be somewhat consistent with my upload schedule when it comes to the series. So I'm instead going to upload the theory video as the fifth video and play the third game of the series today. Before we begin, I would like to thank the sponsor of today's video, My Chess Coaching Academy. If you're looking for high quality chess lessons for an affordable price, then this is certainly the right place for you. We offer online lessons as well, so do consider it if you're serious about chess improvement and want guidance from strong players on how to get there as quickly as possible. More on this at the end of the video, however. What I will do now is I will look for a game online and let's see what we get today. I'll be right back when I find a game. Alright, so we have found a game here. We have the white pieces today. We are facing someone from France, so good luck to my opponent. Let me just change up the overlay real quick to include my opponent's username and rating. Alright, so now that I've done that, I didn't really want to sit editing this video today since I'm not feeling too well, so that's why I did it on the fly there. So we've lost 1 minute there, but that's okay. We are facing an e4, e5 opening, so I'm going to be playing knight f3, and against the standard response knight to c6 throughout the series, this is an excellent time to introduce my recommendation. What I consider here to be the main line as the most popular opening of them all when it comes to e4, e5 positions, that is the Ruy Lopez. Now, when I say something is the most popular way of playing the position, then I certainly do not mean online games. I'm talking about over the board games and master games in particular. We are facing the Berlin defense today, so this gives me an excellent opportunity to talk about the theory associated with the Berlin defense. Now, here is the thing. I want to show you all throughout this series that the Berlin endgame, while it is considered a dead draw at the top level a lot of times, is not really that way at our level. So let's just castle here. And if my opponent decides to take, I will enter the Berlin endgame with the move pawn to d4. So let's see how that goes. So now the theoretical variation here is to play the move pawn to d4. And after the knight retreats, actually there is a very interesting move which is being explored at the highest level here. That is the move pawn takes e5. And if knight takes b5 in that position, there is the move pawn to a4, which traps the knight. And the theoretical main line in that position is knight takes e5, knight takes e5, and then knight back to d6. There is a lot of chaos that goes on in that position. Actually, funnily enough, after rook e1, bishop e7, the main line is bishop g5 there. But I'm going very deep into the theoretical variations here very early in the opening. I don't think my opponent is even going to play knight d6 if I had to guess. But let's see what we get today. I am very interested in just finding out what people play when it comes to the Berlin endgame. Or not even the Berlin endgame, sorry, it's just the Berlin defense. So I'm just waiting for my opponent's move here. Maybe I will. Okay, my opponent just plays the move pawn to a6. Now I can simply take the knight and then take on the e5 square. I can first take the knight and then also play the move rook to e1 at this position, attacking the knight. Then taking on the e5 square is also very appetizing. If I take here and I take with the b pawn, then I can still play knight takes e5 in that position, or play rook e1 first, knight f6, knight takes e5, something like that. Seems very nice. Now, is there any particular reason on why I want to take this knight? Well, not necessarily, but this is a gambit line. I mean, I can always play bishop a4, but that seems to me to not exactly be in the spirit of the variation I'm trying to play. So let's just take the knight. Let's play bishop takes c6 here. I'm expecting d takes c6, opening up the queen's line of sight. And then my move is going to be rook e1. Okay, b takes c6 actually. So b takes c6 I think is significantly worse as compared to d takes c6 because it does not open up the bishop. So let us start with the move rook to e1 here. And we might see a situation where my opponent might find themselves in a lot of trouble very quickly out of the opening. All right, so they want to play this in a very adventurous way. Let's start with knight takes e5, and now the move pawn to f3 will actually pose some very serious problems for my opponent, will it not? Because there is all sorts of knight takes c6 ideas now, and if the knight moves away, then knight takes c6 is actually going to win the queen because this will be a discovered check. So let's see how my opponent wants to handle this. They have certainly mishandled it already, no question about it. But I'm sure that if you give this position to a computer and ask it to play from the black side of things, it'll find a way to get out of the weeds here. For a human, it might be really difficult. So let us see how my opponent wishes to respond. I also think that considering this is a very serious situation right now with my pieces directly aiming at their king and me having much more active pieces, just the queen, rook, and the knight, the combination of it with the king in the center poses a lot of serious problems for my opponent. So I really am curious how my opponent wants to handle this. Now, they certainly can't defend this with the move bishop to d7. I don't think that's possible because the move pawn to f3 will just win the game on the spot. The knight, we will win the knight. So the pawn is just lost, is what I'm thinking right now. But then again, if they want to save the knight, they will likely have to just move the knight, right? Okay, yeah. Now pawn to f3, and the knight is just lost, is it not? It is not necessary for us to play knight takes a6 to win the queen. We also have knight c4 winning the queen. So what I'm going to do here is just play the move f3 and have this knight move, and then knight c4 actually just straight up wins the queen in that position. So that is a very successful Ruy Lopez for our first Ruy Lopez of the series, I suppose. Just goes to show how seemingly innocent opening actually poses so much venom out of the opening, right? I didn't play this in the sense of wanting to set a trap or anything. I am just cleanly winning a piece because that is how the game proceeded pretty much. Note that if my opponent decides to attack my knight in the same way, that doesn't come with the same effect because I can just drop my knight back to the d3 square and their knight is still pinned to the king, whereas my knight is not. I can then continue developing with knight to c3 after I win this knight, develop my bishop out to g5 or even f4 because the knight on d3 actually supports the f4 square. So bishop f4 is a developing move that actually comes with tempo in this position. It might be something I will want to play. Well, depending on my opponent's response, of course. If they lose the queen, that is going to be really bad for them. They lose the knight, well, it's still it's just a lost position, but I mean, it's a little bit better than losing a queen. Yeah, I'm just going to wait for my opponent's response. Probably cut to the. Never mind. They play the move f6. So, like I said, by the way, are we forced to play knight d3? Because whenever they play f6, you should always keep in mind the possibility of queen h5 check. But considering how the queen defends the e5 square, I don't see how anything like this might work, if you know what I mean. So I am just going to calmly drop my knight back to the d3 square. And this has the effect that the knight is now pinned to the king and cannot move anymore. I can take on the next move for sure. There is no danger here either. You should be very careful, of course. Our king is a little bit open with the queen aiming directly at h2. Perhaps even this diagonal being opened up in the near future. But as of now, I don't think that poses any problems. Let's see. Let's see how the game develops. The issue for my opponent is that their own bishop, which would be a very nice attacker of this diagonal and this diagonal, is also very much blocked. Um, in some way, my opponent has managed to mitigate damage in this position, but I mean, the damage is already done. Bishop f4 in this position as well is a really annoying move to have to face. Now, that move, if my opponent intends to take with the bishop, is going to lead to further trades, and I'll probably even win another pawn. So let's take. Let's take here to begin with. If they take with the pawn, I don't even have to move my knight as of now because the pawn is pinned to the king. I do have queen h5 check, but then just bishop g6 and everything is well defended in that position. So what I want to do is start applying pressure to this pawn immediately. So I am going to start with the move. Should I start with the move knight to c3? Because then after this, bishop e3, That's very interesting, actually. Let's think about it. Hmm. Or should I first just start with the move pawn to c3 and then play knight d2 and attack this guy like this? Because it is important in some variations to keep this under guard. Also, very sensible is knight to c5 in this position, which prevents the move pawn to c5 and also attacks the pawn backwards. So, that is also a very reasonable move. And I think I will be playing the move knight to c5 in this position because now the queen also guards the pawn on the d4 square. And the next move can be knight to c3, attacking the pawn once again if they decide to defend the pawn. The knight is, as of now, attacking the pawn on the e4 square. So my next move is very likely to be knight takes e4. If bishop takes e4 and rook takes e4 comes with a check in that position, that is an excellent situation for me. Okay, so my opponent decides to castle and yeah, just attack the pawn. I don't see any problem with simply defending the pawn like this. Actually, c3 is a very nice move in my opinion. I'm not bothered about taking this pawn anymore. I see the king on the queen side like this. I see the opportunity to immediately go attack the king. I am going to play the move pawn to c3 without thinking too much. This is certainly a bad decision. Well, the position was already lost, but this kind of makes everything really bad in my opinion because now the queen is coming out to the a4 square, and then I don't see any reasonable way of defending this pawn because even if he tries e3 queen a4 bishop d3, that is not possible because the knight now controls the d3 square. So I don't know what my opponent will do at this point. Like queen a4, queen takes a6, and queen b7 mate seems like it is pretty much unavoidable. And it probably also helps that the d7 square is actually very well controlled by the knight. So the knight on c5 is like worth 5 points. So I'll take this opportunity actually to explain what the relative value of pieces in chess is. Now we know that the knight is worth 3 points and the rook is worth 5 points, but you cannot tell me that this rook is worth 5 points and this knight is worth three. This knight is worth certainly more than 3 points, probably at least 4.5 points, right? Yeah, so the concept of the value of the pieces in chess not being an absolute quantity and something that keeps changing with the position is very interesting to me. So I like to think of this knight as a 5 point knight. The queen is certainly a very nice attacker here, but this knight is really what is enabling us to just finish the attack off very quickly. Now, in this game, we didn't really develop our queenside pieces, but that is because we did not need to. These pieces were the services of the pieces. If they were needed, I would have brought them in as quickly as possible. But in this particular variation, I mean, it is just check that is coming in on the next move. There is nowhere to stop. Queen takes a6. And a defense like king to b7 is also not available to my opponent because that just leads to checkmate and two moves after this and this. I mean, the game is just over. So I'll just let my opponent think about this and yeah, let's see what my opponent does here. Alright, so actually my opponent just decided to resign right away. And with that game, we actually got our rating. So 748. Okay, we are climbing through the ranks very quickly. So I will talk a little bit about the Berlin defense really quick here. This is not going to be a very long analysis. Hope you guys enjoy it. So now after this video, I have two theory videos to prepare and put out. One is on the part one of the English opening and then part one of the Ruy Lopez, which will be the Berlin defense. Alright guys, I'll be right back with the analysis board here. Alright, guys, so let's get to the analysis. And there is some very surprising stuff that is going on in today's video. So I will get to the surprising stuff at the end of the analysis because that is where it occurs in the game. So for now, let us just start with the analysis as usual. This is the main line theory speedrun, so we will focus on a little bit of theory. Now, knight to c6 is the most common move against e4, e5, and knight f3. There are, of course, other moves. There is d6, which is the Philidos defense. There is knight to f6, which is the Petrov defense. Anything else is not really that good. But knight to c6 is certainly the most common. And we are going to be playing bishop b5 against knight c6 throughout this series. Now, bishop b5 itself entails a lot of theory. The main line here is the move pawn to a6. And after bishop a4, for example, there is knight to f6. And this line goes on forever and ever, really. There is a lot of theory here. We are not going to talk about all of the nuances of the theory in this variation today. Because that's not the point of today's video. Like, that is not what we face. However, I will give you guys a little bit of an idea of what you can expect when you play the move bishop to b5. Now, after a6, immediately I showed you the move bishop a4 without explaining too much. I should mention here that bishop takes c6 is not possible. Because after d takes c6, you cannot really win a pawn. Queen takes d4 just forks the pawn and the knight, and now you have to return with the knight. And this is really bad actually for white, because this type of a situation favors the bishop pair. It is an open center position, so the bishops are really powerful. And after some move like bishop g4, for example, you can try to continue to develop your pieces, but at some point you're going to run out of useful developing moves, and the bishop's power is really going to be felt. So this is certainly not advisable. So for that reason, while it appears that a pawn can be won after the move pawn to a6 in this position, it is not recommended. Bishop a4 is the main line. Now, like I said, we are not going to talk about this today in too much depth. I should also mention that here there are other moves. For example, d6 is called the Steinitz defense. You can respond to this with the simple move pawn to d4, and here white gets very comfortable positions. There is the move bishop c5, and I wanted to dwell for a moment on bishop c5 because the other day in one of the previous episodes we were talking about the center fork trick. I should mention here that the center fork trick does not actually work because of queen g5. Now, of course, if they take here and they allow you to play the move pawn to d4, this is an excellent position for you already. The only problem is that queen g5 attacking the knight and the g2 pawn causes quite some problems here. And you might think that something like this is fine. No, it really isn't. Did I just mess up the board? Yeah, I'm sorry about that. Rook f1, they can play d takes, and if you play something like bishop e2 here, bishop h3 is a problem. They can also play queen takes e4 right away as well. So this is not going to go too well. So after bishop to c5, instead of the center fork trick, the better way to play this is c3, and this is considered the main line. Well, bishop c5 itself is a sideline, but within the sideline we can still have the main line of the sideline and other sidelines, right? So c3 is considered the main line here. And after knight f6, you can just go d4. E takes d4. Well, before taking, it is a very good idea to throw in the move pawn to e5 here, and this gives us a very comfortable position. We will not discuss this any further today, but keep this in mind because bishop to c5 is probably something you will face very often. So is the move pawn to d6 actually. There are, of course, other moves. There is knight d4 here, which is known as bird's defense. Now, here white always gets just a very comfortable position after taking on the d4 square and castling. You certainly don't want to take on the e5 square because the bishop on b5 is hanging in this position. So we take the knight and castle. And there are many ways to play this. There is c3, there is d3, there is f4. We'll discuss this when we do face the bird's defense because that is a pretty common way to face the Ruy Lopez as well if black wants to choose a sideline. There are several other sidelines. One thing I will mention quickly is that if they play the move pawn to f5, this is known as the Yenish gambit. Taking on f5 is not a very good idea because e4 gives black a very good position actually. So a much better way to play this is just play d3. And if something like this happens, then this position is really good for you. After something like bishop c5, knight c3, d6, you can go bishop g5 as well. You're threatening knight d5, so they kind of have to castle in this position to defend the knight, and you can even play h3. We'll discuss these positions once again in some other video. Well, now that that is a nice overview of the Ruy Lopez, let us actually get to what my opponent played in the game, which is knight to f6. Now, knight to f6 is one of the most popular ways of playing against the Ruy Lopez and is known as the Berlin defense. Well, popular at the highest level, I suppose. At the lower levels, you'll see a lot of the other things, especially a6. But knight f6 is certainly one of the most important lines that you have to know. Now, in the game, you probably were thinking of what the Berlin endgame is. I was talking about something known as the Berlin endgame, right? Now is when I will show you what the Berlin endgame is. So here, for example, you can castle, and after knight takes e4, we play the move pawn to d4. I should also mention that if they play the move bishop to e7 in this position, there is rook e1 here, and it kind of transposes into some of the lines of the main line Ruy Lopez, which is the move pawn to a6 instead of knight f6. So the transposition does exist in this position, but for today, let us focus on the main line Berlin defense. Knight takes e4 is considered the main line, and here the move is d4. It is also possible to play rook to e1 in that position, but d4 is certainly the better move. Now, in the game, my opponent played a6 and just got a very bad position after rook e1. But it was definitely possible to play this position much better from my opponent's point of view. One way to play this, for example, after white plays the move d4, is to play the move knight to d6. So knight d6 is actually pretty much forced. I should mention here that e takes d4 is not possible because of rook to e1, and clearly the knight cannot move back because that would be a check. D5 is also a bad idea in this position and is a very common move actually, because after d5 you can play knight takes d4 in this position. There are a few tricks to keep in mind here. Bishop d6 is one of them. After the move bishop d6, you can take in this position, but it is kind of important to keep in mind that there is bishop takes h2 check in this position. This is very important to know because you have to play king h1 in this position. Because if you play king takes h2, they have a draw by perpetual check here. And I hope you guys can see the draw very clearly. I mean, you have to go king h1 or king h2, and they just go back and forth with their queen to make a draw. So if you want to get a good position, which you do in this line, you can go king h1. Now queen h4 is not scary at all because you have rook takes e4, and they do not have a discovered check because the piece that gives the check is lost. So they have to play something like d takes e4 in this position, for example. And now a very important move. Well, queen takes e4 gives you a very comfortable position because you just pick up the bishop and go king g1 next move. But d takes e4 is the more tricky move. So here there is a beautiful tactic, queen to d8. And the crux of everything here is that you end up in a situation where you have two pieces for a rook. And this situation is once again something we will talk about in depth in the sixth episode, which will be a theory episode on the Berlin defense here. But just know that this is very good. And in fact, you can play this position already without knowing too much theory here. Now let us look at the main line. Now, since this is very good for us, that is not how e takes d4 is not how it is supposed to be played. Maybe I should also talk about f5 in this position. After f5, I mean knight takes d4. This is a very dubious line for the black pieces. You can play f3 here, and something like this you can very clearly see the king in the center opening up, and the double pawns on the queen side, isolated pawn on the d file. This is a very really bad situation for black. The main line after d4 is to go back to the d6 square, and this is what was played in the year 2000 in the World Championship match between Garry Kasparov and Vladimir Kramnik. And here at the top level, there are quite a few lines really. Now, at the top level, if white really wants to just make a draw in this position, they can pretty much play this position. Now, of course, even here, black doesn't necessarily have to go for a draw. Because, by the way, we gave up a bishop, but the knight is trapped. Actually, it can't go anywhere. So there are several ways to play this position. If black wants to make a draw, they play the move knight to d4. We will talk about that. But if they want to take on the e5 square, that is also possible to play something like this. This is a very exciting line actually, because in this position you have several interesting options. After rook e1, bishop e7, even bishop g5 here is a move. These lines can get very, very exciting. But usually what black usually does after a4 is just play the move knight to d4. And after knight takes d4, for example, the move order here is very, very precise actually. They can play d5. We need to take en passant. And after knight takes d4, queen takes d4, they can play queen takes d6. And now you see what the problem is for white. They have the bishop pair and they're ready to castle after just bringing out their bishop. So it is really not advisable for white to continue playing in this position. The best that white can do is actually just force a repetition like this. Now it is really up to black. If they don't want to make a draw in this way, they don't need to play in this variation. They can also play bishop d6 here. So if you're a low rated player trying to get a draw against a high rated player, you can expect this. If black is the high rated player, there is no compulsion that black absolutely has to make the draw. But at the highest level, if two 2700 rated players are playing the game, then usually you will see this type of draw many times. Now, all of this is just good knowledge to have, but is actually none of what we are going to enter in the series. What I'm going to enter in the series is a position known as the Berlin Endgame, which I was talking about during the game. So the Berlin endgame can be entered by first taking on the c6 square. Now it doesn't make sense for them to take with the b pawn and leave themselves with an isolated pawn on the queen side. In the endgame, such things matter a lot. So the way it is done is that they play the move d takes c6, and now we can very clearly capture on the e5 square. The knight moves to f5, and we play queen takes d8, and they have to recapture with the king. So this position is what is known as the starting position of the Berlin endgame. Now, at first glance, it might appear that black is actually better here because they have the bishop pair and the center is relatively open, right? And the pawn on e5 kind of sticks out like a sore thumb. Well, it does appear, while it does appear like that, it is not necessarily true. White has several opportunities to claim an advantage. There is the move rook to d1 check, immediately pushing the king back and taking control of the open file. And our development here is actually very clear and very easy to execute as well. And there is also the typical idea of expanding with the pawns on the king side, like moving the knight, playing f4, f5 as well. White does have a pawn majority on the king side, and black does have damaged pawn structure on the queen side. So the moving the pawn mass up the board on the king side is how this endgame is played. It is really instructive to learn how to play this particular endgame, and we will talk about this in depth when we actually speak of the theory of the Berlin defense in the sixth episode of the series coming up. So you can expect to see this position quite often if we do enter the Berlin defense. Now, if you're looking for a sideline and you don't want to enter any of this, after knight f6, there is something called the anti-Berlin, if you can just play the move pawn to d3. But this is something separate that you have to know. It is not considered the main line, so to speak. So that is not going to be what I'll be playing in the series. All right, that was a nice theoretical digression. Let us get back to the game where and see what my opponent played. d4 and a6 in this position. a6 is definitely not a good move. And I did play this correctly. I chose the move rook to e1. The engine says that knight takes e5 here is marginally better, but I don't really see how, because we are allowing the king to just get castled. Rook e1 seems to me to be the natural way of playing this position. And then they played the move pawn to d5. Now, we should talk about knight to f6 in this position because it does appear a little bit complicated for white to gain a very convincing advantage here, because we are not yet in an endgame where the weakness of the pawn structure is really felt. So let's see. I mean, of course, white has a wonderful position. We can play c4, and after knight b6 you need to know this move knight to d4 to really take it to black in this position. The idea is very clear. We want to move the knight out of the way so that the queen can enter the game via the g5 square. And there are several variations that I will show you here. Taking on c4 is just not possible because of the simple queen to g4. Now, there are other moves as well. You can even play knight to c3. Knight to c3 is what the engine will recommend, but this is also very convincing. On the move after knight d4 on bishop e7, once again, this guy is not defended, so might as well do it. Let's play the move queen to g4. And here you see that black experiences some severe difficulties, because if they decide to castle kingside, we have the move bishop to h6, and that very cleanly wins an exchange. They don't have the capacity to play bishop f6 to defend this, or bishop f8 because there is the rook over there. So they have to play g6 and actually just go down an exchange in this position, which is certainly no good here because there is no compensation for the exchange. In fact, the engine will say that you can even play b3 in this position and take a moment to protect your pawn. I wouldn't bother personally. I think the better way to play this is just to play knight d2 or even knight c3. To be honest, maybe knight c3 is even better. Now, I must say that I've analyzed this today with an engine at a low depth. At a high depth, things are going to be a little bit different, is what I'm going to assume. Now, there is also the move after knight d4, the move g6, right? So, here queen g4 doesn't really make so much sense because there is no attack on the g7 pawn anymore. But that's not necessarily the only way in which we can attack them. Now, g6 has created a weakness on f6, so it makes a lot of sense to play knight c3 here. Something like knight takes e4 here, you go knight e4 and try to just enter the position. And this line once again seems to give white a big advantage. After something like bishop g7, once again knight e4, and they can't really try to get their king out of the center because bishop g5 causes a lot of trouble. If they play queen e8 here, now you see the problem with the rook and the queen being lined up, so knight f6 check just ends the game on the spot. And of course, if you can't see why that ends the game on the spot, it is because of a situation like this. And actually, you know what? I'm going to show you guys a really beautiful checkmating pattern here. There is a beautiful move knight to f5 in this position. Now, if they take over here, then queen h5, queen h6, queen g7 is just unstoppable checkmating threats. So they cannot actually take on the f5 square. And if they do something like d6 trying to attack the knight, well, here is a very nice checkmating pattern. You can go knight e7 check, go bishop h6, and you're threatening bishop g7 check. So they absolutely have to go rook g8, defending it, even if that means giving up the exchange. But the exchange is not what we are after. There is a beautiful move, queen to d4 in this position. And now you see the point, right? You have this type of a checkmate with a pawn on the king side when there are three other black pawns in the way. This is not something you see very often. It is a really cool checkmating pattern. So there are some very interesting lines here actually. I will let you guys explore a little bit more here on your own. We will also discuss this in depth in the sixth episode, of course. So knight to f6 here doesn't really cut it either. I mean, at this point, d5 is probably the best that black can do, but here knight takes e5 just gives me a good advantage. Queen to d6 was what was chosen by my opponent. I should mention that bishop d6 was probably the best try. It is not a good idea to play knight takes c6 here once again because of the same motif that we just saw a few minutes ago, right? There is queen takes f2 and queen back to h4 with check, and this is a perpetual check. Black makes a draw. So instead of playing knight takes a6 here, it is a very good idea to just play the move pawn to f3. Now the conversion here is a little bit more difficult because after bishop takes e5, f takes e4, bishop d6, e takes d5, there is king f8. Just note that bishop e7 here doesn't make any sense because now we are just up 2 pawns for like no compensation at all. So king f8. Here you have to know the move queen to h5. Now this position is kind of difficult to play because knight to c3 there is the move queen h4 and you can't really play h3 because there's just bishop takes h3 and now queen g3 happens. You're actually losing here. So my suggestion here would be to not enter this line with the move pawn to f3 here. It makes a lot of sense to me because of practical reasons to play the move bishop f4, which also appears to be one of the most popular variations here. And yeah, I actually say one of the most popular variations because it turns out that even this position has occurred several times in amateur over the board play. So it's actually very interesting that all of this is happening over the board as well. Now, there are several lines here, but I'll show you one of them. The move castles here is what is seen most often, it turns out. So that is what I will focus on for this analysis. F3 here makes a lot of sense. Now the knight can actually return to the f6 square because there is no winning the queen. But here, of course, if not a queen, we do win a pawn. We are attacking the queen here. So after something like queen d7, we can take on the d6 square, c takes d6 and actually play knight e7 here. And once the king moves, we can attack the e5 pawn a second time with knight to c3. That is how you can extricate this knight out of trouble. It appears that they can first play bishop b7 and then try to trap the knight like this, but now you have this very nifty move queen to d3, and after something like rook f8 you can bring the knight back via the f5 square, which is now protected by the queen. So there are these small nuances in almost all of these lines that you have to keep in mind. Can get a little bit tricky, but I mean, learning how to play these positions is how you learn to get better at chess. Now, Queen d6 is not a very good move, of course, because after f3, f6, knight to d3, this is just lost. They cannot move the knight. Of course, I must mention that something like knight here, knight to c4 wins the queen immediately. So my opponent decided to just give up the knight fully rather than lose the queen. And knight c5 here was very nice. The way I came up with knight to c5 in this position was, first I noticed that I wanted to attack the e4 pawn a second time. And second, I noticed that this pawn is actually hanging with a check. So scanning for all the checks just gives you some good ideas in general. The standard Gotham chess advice of looking for all checks, captures, and attacks or threats is actually good, it turns out. Who would have known, right? Yeah, so knight to c5 here is a very good move. And now my opponent castled and I played one of the worst moves I've played on this channel, to be honest, which is the move pawn to c3. Why do I say that this is one of the worst moves that I've played? And this is the surprise I was talking about when I started the analysis. This move is really bad. Now, fortunately, my opponent played g6 and allowed me to just checkmate him by force, or he has to give up the queen for the knight. So, if you haven't already realized it when I was talking about this in the game, you should look at this right now. Pause the video and find the move for black. Well, assuming you've done that, the move is queen takes c5 in this position. No, not g6. Queen takes c5 in this position. I can't believe I missed this. My only explanation to why I missed this is that, I mean, I just thought that the game was winning and relax. Now, fortunately for me, even this position is completely winning because I'm going to be up a rook for what, 2 pawns in the resulting position. But I certainly didn't have to do that. I mean, maybe I'll just show you why. I mean, I guess you can first play bishop takes c5 check and then take the queen on d1. This is what I was talking about. I have an extra rook. Like there are two minor pieces to and two minor pieces, but now you can see extra rook for 2 pawns. The pawns are very weak, but here you do have to be a little bit more careful. After something like this for example, if I play e2, rook e1, bishop f2, now you kind of have to give up the exchange once again. But this is still very much winning for you. After bishop takes e1 and rook takes e1, you're still up 1 point of material and you're going to go knight c1 and win this. So for example, g5, bishop g3, and you can go knight c1 and pick up this pawn. So this is still very fortunately winning for the white pieces. But it certainly didn't have to be this difficult. I could have, after the move long castles in this position, just played bishop e3. Now that it doesn't really make sense to play this because they can't really take, and I have an extra developed piece, right? So all they have done is basically give up a rook for a knight, aside from what they're already down in this position. Excuse me. So bishop e3, the developing move was certainly best. I decided to play c3 for I don't know what reason. I just got really corralled by the move queen to a4. I guess not a very good decision, but fortunately for me, the position does remain winning even after queen takes c5 by a significant margin. So in the grand scheme of things, I guess it doesn't matter. But considering I'm teaching precise play on this channel, this was definitely a little bit sloppy from me. I do apologize for that. I'll try to be a little bit careful even against the beginners that I'm facing here. Opponent, of course, played g6 and after queen f4 resigned the game. So that didn't happen in the game, fortunately. Otherwise, it would have been an awkward moment with me reacting live to queen takes c5 on the board. Well, that'll be it for today's video, everyone. Thanks for watching. If you got this far in the video, then I really do appreciate your viewership. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, then do drop a like, share the video, subscribe to the channel, and more such content coming your way really soon. I hope I feel better very quickly so I can put out the theory videos. I will also quickly mention that I am offering online chess lessons. So we have a few other coaches with us as well now at the Panda School of Chess. So we have a lot of slots open. You guys can have a lot of flexibility in choosing your timings or the type of lessons you want, how many lessons per week you want, and all of that. So depending on you, we can personalize a lot of these lessons for you. So if you're interested in getting personalized coaching from very strong players and experienced trainers, then you can contact me here on the email ID that you see on the screen right now. So I hope to see several of you in my classes. So far, the response to the classes has been really good. I appreciate it. Well, with that, I'll end the video, guys. Goodbye, everyone, and thank you for watching. I hope you all have a great day.